In this second installment, we delve into 3 more stories, spotlighting celebrities with bone-chilling connections to killers. Stories I've come across through my research and the insightful contributions from you, the viewers. These aren't just stories from some thriller or a fiction book. They are genuine tales of terror, encounters experienced by real individuals. These are stories that you don't often hear about, hidden behind the excitement and glamour of celebrity life. They could never have expected or wanted to see the scary and weird things they ended up experiencing. For them, the spotlight turned into a real-life nightmare. Their stories reveal some of the weirdest and most shocking events in celebrity history. Welcome to Perplexus. The 1990s was a golden era for the Chicago Bulls, as their stellar performances played a crucial role in the global popularization of the NBA. Between 1991 and 1998, they secured 6 NBA championships, and leading them was the most famous athlete on the planet, Michael Jordan. Hailed as the greatest basketball player of all time, he would become a global cultural icon. But there is one part of Michael Jordan's life that's not talked about quite so much. The mysterious murder of his father would shock and directly lead to the NBA star's retirement just 2 months after. James Raymond Jordan Sr., born on July 31, 1936 in Wallace, North Carolina, joined the Air Force after graduating from Charity High School. He was stationed in San Antonio, Texas before transferring to a base in Virginia in 1956. That same year, he married his high school sweetheart, Dolores Peoples. After the birth of their first child, Ronald Ronnie Jr., Jordan left the Air Force to work at a textile mill in Wallace. The couple had 2 more children during this period, daughter Dolores and son Larry. After several years in Virginia, they temporarily moved to Brooklyn, New York in 1962, so James could complete mechanics training on the GI Bill. Their son Michael was born during their time in Brooklyn. As crime rates rose in Brooklyn during the 1960s, the Jordan family returned to North Carolina to provide a safer environment for their children. There, the couple's 5th child, Roslyn, was born. James, a lifelong baseball and basketball enthusiast, played a significant role in inspiring his son Michael's athletic career, traveling across the U.S. to follow his games, first at the University of North Carolina and later with the Chicago Bulls. In her 2001 memoir, In My Family's Shadow, James Jordan's daughter Dolores accused him of seeing her from ages 8 to 16. Although Dolores' allegations are quite serious, there isn't any solid proof to support them. a fisherman found a body draped over a tree limb in a South Carolina swamp with a gunshot wound to the chest. With the body badly decomposed and no missing person report matching the description of the dead man, an autopsy was performed. The jaws and hands were preserved for later identification, and the man's body was cremated several days later as a John Doe. 2 days later, a stripped and vandalized red 1992 Lexus SC 400 was found over 60 miles away in the woods of North Carolina. Shockingly, the registration revealed that the car was purchased in Chicago by Michael Jordan. Using James's extensive dental work and fingerprint records, the coroner confirmed his identity.
James Jordan was found shot to death here on August 3rd and floating in a creek just 50 yards from the border of North and South Carolina.
When the Jordan family could not contact James Sr., Michael Jordan's security team initiated their own investigation. A total of 21 days passed before family members reported Jordan missing. It wasn't until Michael's vandalized car was found that the family filed a missing person report. It was later revealed that James Jordan was missing for several weeks since July 22, 1993. Jordan had spent that day at the funeral of a former co-worker in Wilmington, North Carolina, later visiting with friends. He then headed 3.5 hours toward his home in Charlotte, scheduled to fly to Chicago the following day. He never made it. Jordan allegedly grew tired from being on the road so late, he pulled his Lexus over alongside a highway to rest about an hour into his drive. On the same evening, Daniel Green and Larry Demery gathered at a cookout in Lumberton, North Carolina, 2 teenage friends hanging out. Demery, 17, and Green, 18, were both linked to recent robberies and were arrested and charged with Jordan's murder.
Anything you want to say to the Jordan family?
I didn't kill him.
They testified that they intended to rob Jordan, but ended up killing him instead. While the official narrative describes the incident as a botched carjacking, conspiracy theories suggest it could have been tied to organized crime and gambling debts. In an interview on a podcast called What It Was Like, Larry Demery detailed his perspective of the night they encountered Michael Jordan's father. On the night we crossed paths with Michael Jordan's dad, we had already robbed a convenience store and a couple outside a motel. There are motels right by Highway 95, the interstate that runs through North Carolina, so we were hanging around outside, creeping around, waiting for people to pop out. But not much was happening, and we noticed a car sitting not far from the motel, right beside the highway. Daniel actually mentioned it first. He said, "Man, you know what? That's a Lexus." At the time, I didn't know what a Lexus was because they'd only been out for like a year or two, but we decided to go check it out. Upon approaching the car, they found a man asleep, adorned with gold rings and a gold watch. Given his luxury vehicle, Demery and Green initially assumed he was a drug dealer. Demery went on to explain, the plan was to drive him down the road and just put him out, then drive off with his stuff. But it didn't work out that way. Green offered a pistol to Demery, but Demery claimed he refused to take the gun as he didn't want anyone to get hurt. He went on to say that Green then took the pistol and shot the sleeping man. When he was hit, he just moved around a little bit, made a noise, like a moaning noise, then sat up real quick. There was a moment and he laid back again, and that was it. Just a few seconds and he stopped moving. The duo then moved the body from the driver's seat to the passenger's side, after which Green drove off in the Lexus while Demery retrieved his car. Once they had left the crime scene, they stopped near a cornfield to search the vehicle. Daniel started by going through the man's pockets and taking his shoes off. I went to the trunk where I found a couple of golf bags but didn't really notice anything unusual. But then Daniel calls out, "Man, I believe we got Michael Jordan's dad here." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He held up the driver's license and went, "Look," and I read the name James R. Jordan. As we continued going through the car, we took the man's watch off, and the engraving on the back of it read, "To Dad from Michael and Juanita." Suddenly, I noticed one set of golf clubs in the trunk all had the Chicago Bulls sign on them, red and black. After searching the car, they drove to the border of North and South Carolina, where they disposed of the body off a bridge. When we picked the body up from the car, the body made a gurgling sound for about 5 seconds. The sound scared me so bad I almost dropped the body. When we dropped the body off the bridge, we got back into the car and left. The two made 36 calls from Jordan's car phone, with the first one being to a 1-800-SEX line and the rest to Green's and DeMary's friends and family. 36 careless mistakes that led to their swift capture. Further investigation revealed a hidden gun at Green's residence and a rap video featuring Green wearing James Jordan's watch and an NBA ring. During Green's murder trial, Michael Jordan's brother Larry identified the jewelry as gifts from Michael to their father. Upon their arrest, DeMary claimed that the initial plan was merely to tie up their victim, alleging that Green had shot Jordan for no apparent reason. Both men were subsequently convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the accusation resting solely on DeMary's testimony, as Green did not testify. In the earliest weeks after the murder, questions arose on the array of oddities surrounding the case. Why, for instance, would James Jordan choose to park and sleep by the roadside when he was just a few hundred yards away from a quality inn that had rooms for less than $30 per night? More significant, why had his family waited until August 12th to officially report him missing, a full 3 weeks after he had last been seen and 7 days after his Lexus had first been found by police in those far-off woods? The unexpected loss of his father left Michael Jordan devastated, leading to his first retirement from the NBA 2 months later, sending shockwaves through the sports world. Freddie Glenn was born January 6, 1957. He arrived in Colorado Springs in the fall of 1974, fleeing what he would later describe as an abusive situation at home in St. Petersburg, Florida. His father drank and beat his mother. 17-year-old Freddie tried to protect her and got beat himself. His father declared that Freddie had to go or he would kick them all out, including Freddie's mom and his sisters. Freddie went. He had an aunt who worked in food services at Fort Carson, a United States Army post located directly south of Colorado Springs. He stayed with her a few weeks, then found a civilian job at the base and moved into an apartment house that was full of Fort Carson people, including GIs not much older than Glenn. The fact that Glenn had his own car, a white Oldsmobile, made him a popular fellow. Many of the soldiers couldn't afford their own wheels and were often dead broke. Glenn began hanging out with Michael Corbett and Larry Dunn, two of the Army guys he met in the apartment house. Corbett was 19 and seemed to have a fascination with violence. Dunn was in his 30s and had been to Vietnam, where, it was said, he'd seen things that messed with his head. On the night of June 19, 1975, Corbett and Dunn began talking about wanting to pull a robbery to alleviate their chronic lack of funds and needing transportation to make the robbery happen. After drinking some wine, smoking some weed, and taking 2 hits of LSD, Glenn agreed to drive them. He took them to the Four Seasons Motor Inn. He stayed in the car while Corbett and Dunn strolled across the parking lot. Glenn was surprised when they returned not with the motel's receipts, but with a 29-year-old man named Daniel Van Loan. A cook at the motel, Van Loan had been getting into his car when Dunn ordered him at gunpoint to come with them. They put him in Glenn's car and blindfolded him with a scarf provided by Glenn and drove him to a remote area. Police at the time said Van Loan begged for his life, but to no avail. They made him lie on the ground and was fatally shot in the head and robbed, netting his abductors just 50 cents. 8 days later, Glenn and Corbett would meet with another Fort Carson soldier named Winfred Profit, intending to sell him some marijuana. Corbett arranged to meet him at Memorial Park. Glenn drove him there and remained in the car while Corbett went into the park. The release says Corbett stabbed him in the chest, and later told investigators his only reason for stabbing Profit to death was to see what it feels like to stab someone with a bayonet. Glenn and Corbett committed their final and most publicized murder on July 1, 1975. Glenn, Corbett, and 2 other men decided to rob a Red Lobster restaurant. Finding it closed, they changed their plans and abducted an 18-year-old employee named Karen Grammer, who was still at the restaurant waiting for her boyfriend to get off work. After robbing a 7-Eleven, and emerging with $60 in cash and some cheap jewelry, the men took Grammer to the apartment they shared, where they raped her repeatedly. They promised to take Grammer home, then sat her in the car, put a cloth over her head. They then drove around discussing, in her presence, what to do with her. Upon concluding they couldn't risk releasing her, Freddie Glenn took her out of the car, stabbed her repeatedly in the throat, back and hand. They left her for dead in an alley, but she wasn't dead yet. Grammer crawled about 50 yards to a trailer in a nearby trailer park. She attempted unsuccessfully to reach the doorbell, leaving bloody handprints on the side of the trailer. Karen Grammer died in that position, to be found by the trailer's occupant when he awoke the next morning. Police were unable to determine who she was until her roommate at the time called to report her missing and subsequently identified her. As it turns out, Karen Grammer was the sister of Hollywood actor Kelsey Grammer, who is best known for his roles in the TV shows Cheers and Frasier. Glenn distanced himself from Corbett and Dunn after that night, and soon moved out of the apartment house. But the crimes didn't stay unsolved for long, largely because Corbett went on killing people and bragging about it. 3 weeks after Grammer's murder, Corbett shot Winslow Watson III in the face over a stolen loaf of bread. A few weeks after that, he was arrested and charged with a shotgun slaying at a bar. He was suspected but not charged in several other high-profile crimes. Pressure was brought to bear on Larry Dunn, who struck a deal for immunity in exchange for testifying against Corbett and Glenn. Corbett and Glenn were originally sentenced to death for the murders, according to prosecutors, but they were resentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned all existing death sentences in 1979. During a parole hearing for Freddie Glenn in 2014, Kelsey Grammer would forgive the man who raped and killed his sister, but says the murderer should not be released.
I want to believe that you actually have changed your life. I want to believe that you could even find a way to become a useful, productive citizen, flourish. The things you say, I accept a lot of them. She was a terrific kid. She was a wonderful, wonderful person. I miss her all the time. And I accept that you actually live with remorse every day of your life, but I live with tragedy every day of mine.
However, this wouldn't be the only tragedy that would befall the actor. When Grammer was just 13, his father was mindlessly murdered in a home invasion where they lived in St. Thomas. During a period of racial violence in the wake of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, his father Frank's car was set on fire whilst parked on his driveway. Frank confronted the stranger and was shot twice. When testifying, his wife and mother of Kelsey's 4 half-siblings said she had to pull Frank's body from in front of the car as the man threatened to run him over after already murdering him. The man responsible for Frank's murder was found not guilty of murder due to insanity, spending decades in a psychiatric ward. He was eventually released in 1994, but was put away again in 2003 after threatening to kill the judge that ordered a restraining order on him. 5 years after Karen's appalling murder, Kelsey once again found himself tackling a period of intense pain. Stephen and Billy, Kelsey's 2 half-brothers, both sadly died in a scuba diving accident in St. Thomas. During the dive, Billy failed to resurface. Stephen went back down to look for him, but died of an air embolism having ascended improperly. Billy's body was never recovered. Another incident in the family took place when Kelsey Grammer's daughter, Spencer Grammer, was viciously stabbed at a restaurant in New York. In July 2020, Spencer Grammer, also an actress and the voice of Summer on the popular TV show Rick and Morty, was hanging out with a friend in the East Village area when they noticed an argument outside a restaurant named The Black Ant. The dispute was between a restaurant patron and a drunken passerby who was demanding to be served. The man showed up and demanded entry, but he was turned away as closing time was approaching. As their argument escalated, she and her friend attempted to break up the fight. The man, believed by witnesses to have been intoxicated, reportedly went into a rage and drew a knife. He then began indiscriminately attacking guests and employees. Spencer and her friend were both injured by the attacker while trying to protect others. Spencer was stabbed through the hand, resulting in injury to her median nerve and 2 severed tendons, while her friend was stabbed in the back. Both were treated at the hospital, where Spencer underwent surgery to repair the damage to her nerves. Although the NYPD released footage of the suspect, the man has yet to be identified or caught, and the investigation is still ongoing. From 1975 to 1977, several garbage bags filled with human remains were discovered in the Hudson River. The police determined these remains belonged to 6 men. After examining the clothing found with the body parts, it was determined that all the clothing was purchased from leather stores in Greenwich Village, located on the west side of Lower Manhattan, New York. This area was well known as a hub for the gay community due to its numerous gay bars and similar institutions. It was assumed that all victims were likely gay. The case and the subsequent events surrounding it had a significant impact on the gay community. The identities of the victims and their killer remain unknown, though many speculate that a prime suspect in the case is responsible. During the 1970s, Paul Bateson, a gay man, resided in Borough Park, Brooklyn, commuting to Manhattan for work, and to participate in the S&M and leather subcultures of Greenwich Village. Bateson battled with alcoholism, consuming at least a quart of vodka daily, and struggled to maintain steady employment. In a 1977 interview conducted at Rikers Island, Bateson attributed his drinking habit to his time in the army while stationed in Germany, where he felt there was little else to do. Bateson, having trained as a neurological radiological technician, was employed as a radiological technician at the New York University Medical Center, where he was respected and well-liked by his peers. In late 1972, Dr. Barton Lane was performing an angiogram at the Tisch Hospital in the New York University Radiology Lab in Manhattan when he got an unexpected visitor. During these times, the doors were wide open for pretty much anyone to observe doctors at work, and this particular visitor was scouting a location and potential extras for a movie. At that time, an angiogram, a diagnostic test that takes X-ray pictures of blood vessels, was performed with a needle stuck into the patient's artery. When the needle would hit the artery, a jet of blood would shoot out. The visitor, director William Friedkin, saw the impressive spray of blood and knew he wanted this exact procedure in his horror film, an adaptation of the book The Exorcist. After Friedkin witnessed the angiogram in 1972, he told the doctor who performed the procedure, Dr. Lane, that he wanted to recreate exactly what he had just seen for his movie, and he wanted everyone in the room to be in the film. This included Dr. Lane, a nurse named Nancy, and Paul Bateson. In the film, when 12-year-old Reagan starts displaying abnormal behavior, her mother takes her for a brain examination. Reagan is wheeled into a blue operating room where Bateson assists in conducting an angiogram. He has some lines in the scene, telling young Reagan what he'd actually told a number of patients throughout his career. As they're preparing the child for the procedure in the film, Bateson moves her onto the angiographic table. The nurse straps Reagan down, and Bateson pushes a button that slowly puts her into position. Then, Bateson walks around to her front, lowers the top of her gown, and begins to attach wires to her shoulders. The scene is considered one of the most disturbing of the movie because of its hyper-realistic precision. Even today, Lane and other doctors at NYU credit the angiogram scene as one of the most lifelike depictions of a medical procedure in film. In real life, however, this scene had a much more disturbing legacy than simply scaring audiences. Around the release of The Exorcist in 1973, Bateson's drinking escalated, negatively impacting his social life. By 1975, his performance at work was affected, leading to his termination from NYUMC. He survived by taking on various odd jobs, such as minor repair work and cleaning in apartments near his home in Greenwich Village, and ticket collection at a pornographic theater. He also attended AA meetings, managing to stay sober for a while. However, by 1977, Bateson relapsed into heavy drinking. His nights out were spent in leather bars, a habit he had picked up in 1970. In the early hours of September 14, 1977, Addison Verrill, a homosexual reporter who covered the film industry for Variety, met Paul Bateson inside a bar named Badlands. Verrill offered Bateson a beer, after which they drank and consumed poppers and cocaine together. After spending some time inside another bar, they took a taxi to Verrill's apartment, where they kept drinking and consuming drugs, finally having sex at 7:30 a.m. On his own account, Bateson realized that was as far as Verrill had wanted their relationship to go, and as he hated rejection and needed money, he decided to do something he'd never done before. Still intoxicated, he bludgeoned Verrill with a frying pan, then stabbed him high in the chest with a knife. After the murder, Bateson took some of Verrill's money totaling $57, his credit card, passport, and some clothes. He then spent the day drinking heavily with alcohol he bought with the stolen money. Police originally thought it was a robbery gone wrong, but Village Voice reporter Arthur Bell, a gay activist and journalist, believed otherwise. He wrote about Verrill's murder and how murders of gay men in the village were usually seen as the consequence of sexual encounters gone wrong, so they were rarely taken seriously by police or covered by the media. Bell wrote, "Verrill's murder was not a break-in crime. Verrill had brought his assailant home or allowed him into the apartment." Turned out, he was right. All this information were later disclosed by the same Bateson to Arthur Bell. He anonymously called to correct Bell's assumption in one of his articles that Verrill's killer was a psychopath who targeted gays. Bateson added he wanted to atone for his crime. The entire conversation ran on the Village Voice front page. When Bell contacted the authorities about the call, investigators immediately considered it a solid lead because of several details the caller knew, which were not made public. Later, a man referred to by Bell only as Mitch called him while he was in his apartment with the police, waiting for another call from the killer. Mitch told him he knew the man who confessed Verrill's murder. His name was Paul Bateson. The latter was consequently arrested and eventually gave a handwritten confession that was consistent to what he previously told Bell on the phone. He was charged with second-degree murder, to which he pleaded not guilty. While incarcerated at Rikers Island awaiting trial, he was visited by Bell, to whom he said jail was helping him remain sober. At the time, police were investigating a series of murders of gay men, dubbed the Bag Murders, which occurred between 1975 and 1976. The victims had been dismembered post-mortem, their remains placed in plastic bags and discarded in the Hudson River. None of the men were ever identified, though clothes found on the bodies were traced back to a Greenwich Village shop that catered to the gay men in the leather subculture. Tattoos found on the victims also linked them to the S&M community. Since the bags were purportedly linked, by wording on them, to the NYUMC's neuropsychiatric unit, and the killer was speculated to have some kind of medical expertise, investigators began to publicly suggest Bateson to be a suspect in the case. Just like Arthur Bell, William Friedkin, who remembered Bateson from The Exorcist, paid a visit to Bateson before his trial. Bateson, on Friedkin's own account, admitted to killing Verrill and said he was thinking about confessing the Bag murders in exchange for a reduced penalty. His conversation with Bateson inspired Friedkin to make a movie based on a 1970 novel of the same name by Gerald Walker, Cruising, featuring a policeman, played by Al Pacino, who goes undercover in the SM gay community in order to catch a serial killer targeting homosexual men. The movie aired in 1980 to mixed reviews after heavy protests by the city's gay community during production. Art had already imitated life when, during the span of the killings, Detective Randy Jurgensen, who also appeared in Cruising, went really undercover as a gay man in order to track down the slayer. Despite attempts by his attorney to suppress Bateson's confession, claiming it was handed by him while drunk, that police didn't read him his rights, and that he simply inspired himself to Arthur Bell's article, the trial ended on March 5, 1979, with a conviction. At his sentencing, prosecutor William Hoyt called him a psychopath, reiterating his belief that he was also guilty of the Bag murders, claiming that despite the absence of evidence connecting Bateson to them, he confessed the killings to a friend of his, Richard Ryan. On his part, Bateson always denied being guilty of the murders, at least publicly. He was sentenced to 20 years to life imprisonment. Bateson served 24 years and 3 months of his sentence, becoming eligible for parole in 1997. He was finally released in 2003 successfully completing his parole in 2008. From then on, Paul Bateson disappeared from public record, and his current whereabouts or whether he is still alive are unknown. It is highly probable that he died on September 15, 2012, as a Social Security death index shows a Paul F. Bateson, born on August 24, 1940, with a Social Security number issued in Pennsylvania, passed away on that day.